you so much for giving us this time together, and bless us as we explore your word. Certainly be with those who are having surgery or recovering from surgery. Show them your grace and your love. Be with Ron and Shelley as they enter a hearing adventure, and certainly be with Barb as she gets news and makes decisions on how she wants to respond. And in fact, be with us all. Give us insight and awareness in the name of Christ, we pray. Amen. Amen. Okay, good. We are in the midst of Samuel, 1 Samuel, and a lot of stuff has happened, right, in 1 Samuel. Because when we started the book, where were we right at the beginning? Where does 1 Samuel, where does it begin?
1 Samuel.
First Samuel. Yeah, because we went from Judges. Because this is all part of one story, even though, some of the books have different perspectives, like Joshua and Judges. But we finish Judges, we get into Samuel, and where does Samuel start? What's happening right at the beginning in Samuel?
The birth of Samuel.
Okay, we got the birth of Samuel. Yeah, if you got headings in your Bible, that's a good way to look at it. Yeah. We got the birth of Samuel, and that's an interesting story because his birth is kind of miraculous. And his mother, he's presented at the temple and is raised there. So we've got Samuel, and what role does Samuel play in 1 Samuel? Or initially, what is his role? Who is Samuel? Or what is Samuel?
Prophet. Yeah.
Well, he is a prophet. He also functions as
a priest. No.
Well, yeah, a priest and a judge. Remember, he is sort of the last of the judges, because as Samuel does his thing, and he is a prophet, and he is a priest, and he is a judge. The people want what? What do the people want? They want a king. They want a king. And, depending on, the strand that is in Samuel, some of the writers, the tellers of the story, think that's a good idea. Others think it's a bad idea. Because it's a good idea because you need a king to organize the people, to focus them, to get them fired up for God. Kings are helpful to do that. On the other hand, if the people have a king,
they have to pay all this
They have to pay all this kind of stuff. And when you get right down to it, who should be the king? Whom should they look to for guidance and direction? God. And so why do you need a king when God can be your king? So you've got these two strands that are sort of flowing through Samuel. Anyways, who ends up becoming the first king? Saul becomes the first king. And there are several stories about how Saul ends up being king, and some of them are good and some of them are not so good. Some of them involve donkeys, and some of them involve him hiding in packages, but Saul ends up becoming king, and Saul would appear to be a military leader because that's what he does. He fights, and what people does he seem to fight all the time? Philistines. There's constant war with the Philistines. So he's fighting the Philistines, and he evidently is this charismatic leader, good military leader, leads Israel to fight the Philistines and other enemies, Ammonites and Amalekites and other kites, and he seems to be really successful. What is the tragic flaw in Saul? So Saul would seem to be this charismatic, he dances with the judge, with other prophets, full of the Spirit, fires the people up, gets them focused. What is that flaw, almost the tragic flaw in? Well, he eventually becomes jealous, you're right. Before jealousy, when it's just Saul as king, what's that flaw and we're going to see it come out in what we look at today. What's the flaw that Saul seems to have that gets him into trouble?
He's impetuous.
He's impetuous.
Yeah.
He doesn't think. And maybe that's every coin has two sides. Maybe that's the other side of having a charismatic leader. The charismatic leaders often react. They don't think before they just react. And that seems to be what Saul does. He just reacts. And it's gotten him into trouble. When did it get him into trouble? What are a couple of things that Saul did that the writer sort of points to that gets Saul into trouble?
I actually forget.
Well, remember, he's fighting again the Philistines. The Philistine army is there. The Israelites he's got his army, but they're running away and hiding into caves. And Saul feels he needs to get the people focused on the battle. And so he calls Samuel to come to show that God is on our side and is going to fight for us just like he used to. But Samuel is delayed in getting there, so Saul decides to go ahead and make a sacrifice to God. And
he's not allowed to make a sacrifice.
He's a Benjaminite. He's not allowed to make sacrifices to God. But he did it with good intention. But that's not the law. That's not the law. One example that we even see referred to here. Remember when he was fighting the Ammonites on the other east side of the Jordan, and he's told to do what? What's he told to do? Kill every single living thing. Every living thing. Man, woman, child, animal, everything you're supposed to kill. And what does Saul do?
He keeps some of the animals.
In fact, he keeps
the sheep.
He keeps the best of the best of the animals. Now you say, "Ooh, he's keeping the best of the animals for himself." Well, is he keeping them for himself?
No.
Why? He's going to keep the best of the animals to sacrifice to God, to thank God for this incredible victory he's won. But Samuel says,
you're not allowed to make a sacrifice.
If God said kill everything, you're supposed to kill everything. You can't make this decision on your own, even regardless of the motives. You gotta think before you act. And then another one with Jonathan and the honey. His army, you can't eat before the battle. Well, that didn't make any sense.
He didn't
know. But he said, if anybody eats before the battle, before we win victory, I'm going to kill him.
So they'd have the strength they need without eating.
Well, it was a dumb thing. But that's what Saul does. Yeah. That's that flaw in Saul. He's impetuous. And what ends up happening as a result of him being so impetuous? He gets into trouble. And what is the ultimate trouble he gets into?
God takes his kingdom.
God says, you're not going to be my king anymore. Yeah. And I'm going to give it to somebody else. And we got David that enters the story, that Samuel anoints David to be king. Well, Saul and David kind of get together. And what are the stories that reflect kind of independent, because they aren't necessarily related to one another, but we got the stories of how David and Saul end up getting together. In principle, what are the two primary stories that show David and Saul getting together?
David plays music to calm Saul's evil spirits.
Saul is tormented by evil spirits, and David plays and calms him down. Sometimes. Because sometimes Saul does what?
He throws spears?
Yeah, chuck spears, which that's what he tends to do to people. He'll chuck a spear at him. So this is together. That's one. What's the other story? Another big story about how David and Saul get together.
Eventually, David becomes so well known and loved, and he kills more of the Philistines than Saul did. So.
Even before that.
Oh.
You're right. You're 100% right. But even before that, Goliath. And remember, Goliath. Goliath is a whole different thing because doesn't seem him coming in to play music is first, and then Goliath. But the Goliath story, he's coming from his hometown and bringing stuff to his brothers, and Saul doesn't seem to know him, and he goes and kills Goliath, which with the sling, because he's a shepherd, and that's what shepherds do. So either way, Saul and David get together. David becomes a military leader too, and his success is greater than Saul. And so how with Saul, what ends up being the relationship between David and Saul?
Well, that's where Saul gets jealous.
Saul gets jealous. He's tormented by this evil spirit. He decides, what's he going to do with David? He's got to get rid of David. Now, whether he knows he's king or not depends on which of the stories you read. Because sometimes he does and sometimes he doesn't. David doesn't seem to know, but Saul wants to eliminate David. Now, what complicates this little story? Who in Saul's family enters
his son
Jonathan? And what's Jonathan's relationship with David?
He loves David.
Okay, they're very, very close. So Saul's son and David are really close. Saul wants to kill David, and Jonathan wants to protect him, even at the expense of his father.
Yes.
Okay, and Jonathan is sort of this perfect guy. He's perfect. Okay, last week we looked at two stories that are remarkably similar in terms of the point they're trying to make. In both of those stories, because they relate to David's relationship with Saul. So Saul is chasing David, right? David is hiding out with his little group, his merry men. Hiding out in caves and deserts and stuff. What were the two stories that would appear as though the animosity between David and Saul settles down? What are those two stories? What happens in the stories we looked at last week, outside of David getting a new wife as a result of...
Well, Jonathan tries to intercede with his dad for David's life.
Well, he does, right. What happened when but Saul's pursuing David, right?
Yes.
Saul's pursuing David. What happens as Saul is pursuing David? And like I said, we got two stories that kind of make the same points, almost very similar, different in terms of content, but very similar in terms of meaning. What happens when they're on other sides of the mountain and David is hiding in a cave? You remember that one?
Yeah.
Cuts his rope. Saul goes into the cave, and David sneaks behind and cuts his robe and says, I could have killed you, but I didn't. And Saul says,
he makes up with them.
I'm so sorry I've done this. I understand now and I trust you. And he goes off and goes home, right? Mm-hmm. But then we got another story where Saul is...
People are telling Saul that David is doing all
is back.
Yes.
Saul is pursuing him again. Yeah. And this time he's got armies, and David's got a little band, right? Like 600 people around him. And what's that story with Saul and David? Because it's very similar.
Where David kills 10,000 and Saul only kills
1,000. That's what people are singing, and that's going to be important in what we look at this week. But what was that specific when we got Saul's army ready to bring the hammer down on David? What does David do?
Is that when he sneaks in?
Yeah, with somebody else. Sneaks into camp.
Takes his
spear and water jug and does the same thing. Shows Saul, look. This, and the guy he's with says, now you got the chance. Mm-hmm. Kill him. Now he's asleep right in front of you, kill him. And David says, no, I cannot kill God's anointed, the one whom God has chosen. So he takes the stuff, but shows Saul later, look, I was this close to you. Because the spear was at Saul's head. I was this close and chose not to. Why are you doing this to me? And Saul says...
He apologized.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Which is the same thing.
Yeah.
And then he takes his army home. Two stories, maybe flowed independently in the day that the writer, the redactor, the one who's bringing these stories together, puts into one narrative, both making the same point. Would appear as though Saul and David are
Buddy.
but at least no animosity.
Yeah.
Saul is no longer pursuing David. Well, that is until we get to 27, because we've got 22. Understand, all of these are independent stories that a redactor is kind of putting together into a narrative. 500 years later, after people would say this stuff is occurring, 500 years, 600 years, 700 years later, they're putting it into a narrative. So we're talking about much later, and these are like independent oral stories that are being passed along. So we've got a kind of a different situation again as we enter chapter 27, where who is introduced right at the beginning of 27?
David.
Okay, we got David. And what is David thinking?
That Saul will someday get him.
Well, Saul's going to want someday get him. Now, having gone through the stories in 24 and 26, you'd say, well, why would David think that? Twice Saul reconciled with him, but
That's the point.
the flow is, we're not worried about that. We're talking about different stories. Okay, so David is thinking that eventually Saul is going to get him. So what does David decide to do?
Escape.
He's going to go to the land of the Philistines, right? And what is the big deal with the Philistines?
They've always had a,
enemies.
yes.
Lord have mercy. They have always been enemies of Israel. And they've been the ones that have been causing all kinds of problems throughout the book of 1 Samuel. People that lived on the coast. They are right on the Mediterranean Sea, right on the coast. Okay, so he's going to escape to the Philistines. Why would that be? Might that be a solution?
Because Saul wouldn't follow him.
Okay, Saul's not going to follow him into another country. It's like a criminal trying to escape to Mexico. He's not going to come after him once he's in the land of the Philistines. Of course, we've got kind of an interesting situation, because what is it that women used to sing to David when David would come back to town, would enter a town? Remember the song that women would sing? Saul has killed his thousands, and David has killed his tens of thousands. And who was being killed? Philistines. So David has a reputation of being pretty hard on Philistines. Okay, but that's where he's going, because Saul's not going to pursue him into another country. Now, where does David go? And when he goes, is he going alone?
No, he takes his.
Okay, he takes his merry men with him. And where does he go when he goes to the land of
Gath?
He goes to the city of Gath. Now, the Philistines are supposed to have 5 kings to these cities, because remember, I've told you, when you look at nations, it's really a different concept of country. We've got countries as political units with very clear borders, and that's not the way it is here. So you have cities that become center, and when you talk about like Philistines or Israelites or Edomites or Moabites, you're almost talking more about language and culture. These are truly nations, not necessarily what we think of as countries. They're more nations, people that share certain things together.
This is stupid, but did you ever really, when you're reading this, think about today? They paid the king, they had to do so much for the king. Okay, we have a president,
Right.
and we have to pay so much money into the
Absolutely.
government, the same way.
That's absolutely.
And also with them getting a king, wanted a king, they didn't have it, thought they should because the other people had a king.
Right.
It's sort of like keeping up with the Joneses.
Absolutely.
It just reminded me that.
Well, and that's an excellent point, because I think that is exactly when Samuel says that, because it's Samuel that tells him that. Mm-hmm. When Samuel tells him, I think that is exactly what's underlying. Understand, kings are not cheap.
Yeah.
Kings are not cheap, and shouldn't be, because kings are organizing. You're paying for a whole nother level of society,
Yeah.
of people who sort of maintain things. And that's not cheap. And, yeah, it is like, if I want a king because everybody else has a king,
Yeah.
I want this because everybody else has this.
Yeah.
And I think that's to sort of mock, to undermine.
Well,
the
that's when
idea of king.
when I was reading it, I thought of that, and I thought, holy smokes, it hasn't really changed. Really, history kind of repeats itself as it goes along, it's just different.
Now,
Modern.
right. Now, the other strength, that was on Samuel's side. This idea that kings are bad. All you need is God, and God should be enough. Remember at the end of Judges, when we looked at Judges, twice the writer of Judges says, since they didn't have a king, the people were going crazy. There was no law. People were a law to themselves. There was no structure, no order. Other powers were coming in all the time, stealing stuff and going back. So there's a strain in there that, man, you need a king. Because if you don't have a king, one, you're going to have nobody to keep you straight. And second, you're going to have nobody to keep the other guys from coming in and getting your stuff. So you really need. And both of those ideas in 1 Samuel are flowing. And that's one of the things that makes it really interesting is it's almost like here they haven't made the decision whether a king is a net good or a net bad. After you take the cost, is it better to have a king or not? It depends on who you talk to.
And it depends on the king.
It depends on the king. And maybe that's part of it too. That if you have a king, you got to know you're going to have some bad ones. You're going to have some good ones, but you can't make the assumption you're always going to have, they're always going to be good, because you're going to have some stinkers. And Israel finds that they have more stinkers than good. They really do when you look at the history. They've got a lot of bad kings. So anyway, David's with the Philistines. He's got his 600 men. He is there, and the writer tells us he's not there alone. Not only does he have his men, but he has his wife, his family. Now, he's there in the land of the Philistines talking to the king, Achish, and he's got 600 men with him, right? Now, why is he there with 600 men? What is he doing with these 600 men in the land of the Philistines?
It's trying to show his strength and so.
Okay, yeah, David's showing his strength. In fact, what would we call him and his little band now? I mean, he's taking his small little army into the land of the Philistines, right? Is he looking to be a farmer?
No.
No. Is he looking to be a shepherd?
No.
To have flocks? No. Is he looking to be trade? No. What is he and his little band going to do?
Terrorize.
Terrorize! You were exactly right. He's going to be a terror. He's going in as a mercenary. He's coming into this land. He says, I got 600 men. Let me stay here and it'll be worth your while. And that's what, David does. Remember the story of Nabal we looked at last week. David said, I'm protecting the flocks. But in fact, what was David doing?
Stealing.
Yeah, he was shaking him down. Understand, if you don't give me food, me and my men food, something bad might happen to you.
Yeah, paying for protection.
That's right. Pay me and I'll protect, make sure nothing bad. Because it'd be terrible if an accident happened.
Yes, exactly.
Unexplained accident happened to you and your flock. Wouldn't that be a shame? And of course Nabal said, get out of here. And his wife had to talk David into not killing him. And, Nabal she ended up paying off what David wanted. Anyway, so David is here with his little band, and he's going to be a terror. That's why the king lets him do. Now, what does David say to the king after he's been there? Now, by the way, once David is in the land of the Philistines, does Saul continue to pursue him? No. So David's right. Once he crosses into another land, Saul is going to leave him alone. Now, after we get the sense that he's been there for a while. What does David say to the king?
He wants somewhere to live.
Give
him a piece of land.
I need somewhere to live. Now, where has he been? He's been in Gath, right? And that's where this particular king lives. Now, David doesn't want to be in Gath anymore. He wants his own place. And why wouldn't he want to be in the place where the king lives?
Because he's stealing and thieving and all that.
Yeah, that's pretty hard. You don't make your hideout. I've seen a lot of Western movies. The bandits don't make their hideout in the middle of town, right? They got to have their hideout somewhere out in the country. And what does the king do for David?
He gives it to him.
He gives him a little place in the country, Ziklag, and what does it? And the writer tells us what about Ziklag?
It's belonged to the kings of Judah.
Okay, the kings of Judah, and that's what David's going to be. He's going to be the first king. Have owned this property forever. So it's kind of connecting with the audience. The audience knows this place. It's a little bit of the history. How did this end up becoming a property of the kings of Judah? Well, it goes all the way back to David in here. So what has the king given David and his 600 men?
The place of his own, out of town.
Yeah, giving him a hideout, giving him a place to be as he takes his. And the writer tells us how long does David spend with the Philistines?
Year and 4 months.
Year and 4 months. Okay, so David is there. Now, again, Alice, you nailed it. What does David do while he's there? He kills a lot of people, right? He does a lot of raiding, right? And we've got different people that he's raiding. Very interesting, when you look at the names of the people he's raiding, they all have something in common. They're all given as enemies of the people of Judah. They're foreign people that are around the land. They're not Jews. So he's raiding these people. And how are these raids described?
He killed the people, but he took the animals.
Okay, he takes all the animals and he kills all the people. That's what David and his band, that's what they do. So if we were looking at modern, if this were happening now, what would we call David?
Terrorist.
Okay, might call him a terrorist, although David is not doing this for a cause. He is not fighting for some cause, right? What is he doing?
Just stealing.
He's stealing. That's what he's doing. He's kind of like a bandit or a mobster.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what he's doing. And in fact, it's kind of sad why does he kill all the people? Well,
so they can't testify
against it.
Yeah.
Dead people make bad witnesses. Yeah. So anyway, that's what David is doing. He's a bandit. That's what he does. He raids. This isn't warfare. These are conducting raids against these people living in the land. But when the king Achish asks him, what does he tell? What does he tell the king of the Philistines, or the king of Gath? When he asks, David, tell me about what you're doing.
He's raiding the enemy instead of...
he's raiding, that's right, he's raiding Judah instead of these other places. So in other words, what is David doing?
Helping Israel.
Well, he's certainly not hurting Israel. What is he doing with respect to the king? He is lying right through his teeth. David is lying right through his teeth. Because he is not doing this, but he's telling the king he is. Why would he be telling the king that he is? That he's raiding Judah and not these other...
So he could stay there and he wouldn't get in trouble.
So he could stay there and not get in trouble, because the king is going to protect him. He's going to allow him to have this little city in the Philistines, and as long as he's raiding the enemy, he's okay. So, all right. So anyway, that's what he's doing. Now, how does the king see David? How does the king Achish ends up seeing David? Okay, he ends up trusting, which is kind of an irony, right? Mm-hmm. Because what is David doing?
Lying.
He's lying right through his teeth. He's lying. In fact, the reason he trusts is, again, ironic. Why does the king trust David?
Because he thinks he'd be his all the time because he's killing people.
Because he's killing Israelites.
Yeah.
You know, and you gotta like this guy. I mean, he's killing Israelites, and the enemy of my enemy has got to be my friend. So David is doing something good for me, which is not what David is doing at all. Although what David is doing is pretty bad, at least from our perspective. From their perspective, in their culture, it may not be. Although it's not great. So what is David doing for himself here in Ziklag?
He's getting into their good graces.
He's getting into the good graces of the Philistines, right? Mm-hmm. And he's building up his little power base in Ziklag. Okay. Now, what is the only thing? And he is making all kinds of money, raiding these other people, kind of like a pirate.
Yeah.
It's kind of doing what pirates do. You know, only he's telling the king, oh yeah, I'm only attacking Spanish ships.
Yeah.
But man, he's attacking any ship that floats by.
That's right.
You know, so anyway, this is a pretty good situation for David, right? What's the only thing that could really screw it up? What could screw up this cushy relationship or situation in Ziklag?
Any of the places that he raided that he shouldn't have went to the king and told him.
Okay, that would mess it up.
Yeah.
If he raids this village
Yeah.
of the Gershonites, and somebody comes, staggers in and tells the king, we're not from Judah, we're Gershonites, and we were minding our own business, and David attacked us. Ooh, that would be a problem. How does David deal with that possibility?
Everybody.
He kills everything. Everybody. So nobody is talking. All right? So David has figured out how to eliminate that problem. What would be another issue that would really mess up this situation?
If Saul would show up.
What's that?
If Saul would show up.
If Saul would show up would be good. Is Saul going to show up?
No.
No. In fact, what we've seen is the Israelites tend to only react when the Philistines enter their territory, which tells us what about the Philistines?
They're more powerful.
They're more powerful. So the Israelites do not want to poke the bear. They're not going to attack the Philistines. They're happy to let the Philistines do their thing as long as they leave them alone. Okay, and David is hiding out there, attacking foreign people, but he's not attacking Jews, right? He's not attacking Israel. He's not attacking Judah. He's only attacking these foreign people. Although he's telling the king that his raids are in Judah. What would really screw this up? So he solved the problem of witnesses. He's not worried about Saul pursuing him. What would really mess up this wonderful little thing David has created?
He has to go fight with the Philistines.
What happens if war breaks out between the Philistines and Israel? Why would that mess things up? Because David's either going to have to fight the Israelites or he's going to have to run away. That's right, run away and hide. Because if he doesn't fight the Israelites, then the Philistines are going to know that what he was doing was a lot of baloney. And the Philistines are going to shut the little Ziklag operation down, right? All right. So this would be, but right now everything is wonderful, right?
Yep, working in David's favor.
And working in David's favor. What happens at the beginning of 28?
Philistines are going to go to war with Israel.
Oops. Oops. We got a problem, right? And what does the king, Achish, say to David?
He wants him and his men to go with them.
Yeah, boy. We're at war with the Israelites. Clearly, there can't be any... You have no moral problem fighting the Israelites because you've been raiding their territory for a year and 4 months. So you cannot have any problem with that, right? What does David say to Achish?
Okay.
Okay.
We'll see what your servant can
What did he say?
Okay. Me and my men are with you.
Yep.
Now, David's got a dilemma, right? Because he's either going to have to fight or not. What does David say?
He tells him that he would see for himself what his servant can do.
Okay, I will prove what kind of, now, the possibility still exists, right? David's men can join the army, they can march against Israel, and when the fighting occurs,
Run away.
well, run away, or maybe, not fight quite so hard, not be quite as involved, right? And evidently Achish is thinking the same thing, because Achish says to David, thank you. I know right where I'm going to put you. You and your men.
You be my boy.
Yep.
I'm going to put you right beside me. Why is that so important?
Because David can't go off somewhere and do anything else.
That's
to
right.
protect him.
David, and where the king is, that's where the fighting's going to be hottest.
Yeah.
So I'm going to make sure, since you were so dedicated to me, I'm going to put you in a place where you're going to have the chance to kill a few Israelites. Because I'm going to put you right beside me.
Yep.
Okay, so David is now, and I want you to appreciate how good this writer is. I mean, he's building up tension right here. So David is in this terrible dilemma. But what do we know about David? What do we know about David right now, the reader? The king, Achish, doesn't know it. But what do we know about David?
He hasn't killed any Israelites.
He hasn't killed any Israelites. What else do we know about it?
Well, we know he's going to be king, so we know he's not going to be killed.
Right. We know he's going to be king. He isn't going to get killed. The Philistines are not going to hold him accountable for anything he's done, because he's going to be king, the king of Israel. We know that already. So that's no mystery. So it's almost like, you remember the old television show Columbo? You remember Columbo when it was on television? One of the things that was, Dad loved Columbo. We watched Columbo every week. And what Dad liked so much about Columbo is, you remember how the story was told? At the very beginning there was a murder, right? But we knew who the murderer was. It wasn't a mystery. We know who did it. Jack Cassidy usually did it. He was the one that did it. And so we know who the murderer was.
Yes.
And what was the whole then premise of Columbo? If we know who did it in the first 20 minutes, why did we watch the rest of it?
Because he made it so interesting.
What did Columbo do? What made that show so interesting?
Well, he kind of knew who did it too.
Okay, he started putting it together. He started putting it together. And we got to follow him as he solved the crime that we already knew. So it wasn't like we were looking at it and saying, gosh, who did it?
Yeah.
Not like Murder, She Wrote. Oh, who did it? We were watching him solve the crime, right?
Yeah.
And
but he really thought of him as being that smart.
Oh, yeah,
that
yeah.
He's sort of bumbling.
And that's what we kind of enjoyed, him bumbling around.
Yeah.
But he'd always come to the solution at the end, right?
Yep.
So it wasn't Perry Mason, it wasn't Murder, She Wrote. We know who did it. Right? Oh,
And I watched all this.
This is my we are right together on this, right? This is kind of what we're looking at here. We know how the story's going to end, right? We just don't know how we're going to get there. And that really becomes what's interesting. And the writer knows that, and he's kind of set it up. Okay, so verse by verse 3. So we know that David is in a real bind. What happens in verse 3?
Samuel does.
We're talking about David and the king, right?
Yeah.
And now, boom, we are at Samuel dying. Now, has Samuel died? Do we know about Samuel dying before? Yes. They've already told us that Samuel dies, right? And he's buried and everybody is sad. We already know that. And after he dies, what does Saul decide to do?
Expels the mediums.
Okay, he's expelling the mediums. He kept the small and the largest, but he expelled all the mediums. Who else? He expelled the mediums, and he expelled the spiritualists, the wizardry. He expelled all these people. And why would he do that? Now, by the way, what are mediums? What are mediums?
It's sort of between you and the dead.
Yeah, that's kind of what they are. Mediums communicate with spirits. And through the communication of spirits, they can sort of see things that other people can't see. They're not prophets. And the law is really clear that you don't listen to mediums and you don't listen to seers because they aren't speaking for God. They aren't. They're connected to this other spiritual world. Okay, so he expels them. Now remember, what was his fatal? We talked about his flaw, his character flaw. What was one of Saul's flaws? Maybe his principal flaw. He's impetuous. So Samuel dies. He gets rid of all the mediums. Everybody who can communicate to spirits is gone, right? Out of the land. What's about to happen? What's about to happen in verse 4?
The Philistines are getting ready to...
The Philistines are there encamped. Saul is there encamped. They're going to fight. How does Saul feel?
He was afraid.
He is terribly afraid, which is different for Saul because Saul is his military leader. He is really, really terrified. And so what does Saul do because he's so terrified?
He goes to a medium.
Well, even before he goes to a medium, he starts talking to God, right? Mm-hmm. And he uses all the techniques that are appropriate to talk to God. What's the problem?
God doesn't answer.
God doesn't answer. He's not getting anything from God. And he is scared to death with his army, facing this other army. He needs information. And what does he order his servants to do? Now you got to find a medium, right?
Yes.
So that I can talk to her and maybe she can give me insight. Now, what's the problem?
They have to find one.
They're all gone. They got to find her. They got to find a medium, and they end up finding one at Endor. And again, this is typical Saul. He is acting without thinking. This is this impetuous Saul. This flaw. So what does Saul? So they find this medium at Endor. What does Saul do?
Oh, he puts on different clothes.
He puts on different clothes. He puts on a disguise, fake mustache, little fake mustache, and he goes with two other guys, right, mm-hmm. to see. And what does he ask her?
To console.
Okay, console the spirit for me. In other words, do what you do. Yeah, I want you to do your job. You're a medium. I'll pay you to console the spirit for me. And how does she respond?
She asks him if he's doing this just and then kill her.
And what she says is really kind of cool. What does she say to him?
Why have you set a trap for my life to bring about my death?
Yeah. Well, unknown stranger in a disguise. Saul has done what? Has thrown all the mediums out of the country, right?
Yeah.
And I am here on the down low, How do I know? I don't want to, in a sense, what she said, I don't want to get into trouble.
Yeah.
You may be setting me up. This may be a sting operation, right?
Yes.
You may be doing that so you'll tell Saul, and Saul's going to do what? Because I'm doing something illegal. I'm not even supposed to be here. What's he going to do? He's going to kill me. Okay. And what does Saul say?
He told her...
he swears by the Lord that she won't be punished.
Now, again, irony is something these writers, ancient writers, use a lot. This writer does it a lot. What's so ironic when he comes to her and says... as God lives, no punishment will come to you.
He's not talking to God.
He can't talk to God.
Yes.
That's the problem. He doesn't know what God wants because God doesn't talk to him anymore. Okay, but evidently the woman believes him.
That's right.
And so what does she say? Okay,
Yeah.
to whom do you want to talk? And he says,
Samuel.
I want to talk to Samuel. Now, why would he want to talk? Because the writer just told us that Samuel's dead, right? So I want to talk to Samuel. What is Saul attempting to do? Which becomes really, really sad when you think about it.
He wants to find out the future, then what he should do.
And how does he do it? How is he trying to find out the future?
Through Samuel.
Through Samuel. What makes that particularly sad, that he's going to Samuel to try to figure out the future?
Samuel's dead.
Samuel's dead, and Samuel's the past. So he's desperately trying to go to the past to figure out how he's going to deal with this thing that is causing him to feel absolutely terrified. He's going back to a time when things were better for him, right? When he could go to Samuel and talk, and Samuel made him king, and everything was great. If I can just go back to talk to Samuel, I know he'll fix it. I know he'll fix it. Things are bad now, but if I can just go back to Samuel, he'll be able to tell me what to do. Okay, and what happens when Samuel comes? What's the first thing? Before Samuel says a word, what's the first thing? What does the medium say?
She said he was Saul. You deceived me.
The first thing Samuel told me is that you're Saul, and which means you have really set me up. And Saul says to her,
Don't be afraid. What do you see?
Don't be afraid. What do you see? And what does she say she sees?
A spirit.
The spirit.
She sees a spirit, and she describes him, right? And he is an old guy in a robe. Okay. And Saul, evidently that's enough information. Saul does what?
Bows down.
Bows down to the ground. Okay, bows down to the ground. Now, what is the first thing that Samuel says? So he knows he's... And see, this becomes the writer telling us, the reader, that it really is. Saul recognizes it's Samuel, so we, the reader, can believe this isn't a false spirit. This is really Samuel. What is the first thing
He
Samuel
asked him
says?
why he disturbed him. Brought him up.
Why did you dig me up? Well, and that's really pertinent in terms of the way the Jews will later see life after death. And in fact, we even see this in the New Testament. When you read the New Testament, there are different in the Gospels, there are different Jewish groups mentioned. Pharisees are a big one. Pharisees, they had a lot of characteristics, a lot of things Pharisees did. But one of the things Pharisees believed was they believed that the whole Old Testament canon had equal weight. And therefore, if you read in like the prophets that there was life after death, then there must be life after death. They held the whole canon. And life after death became something that Jews increasingly believed later, because it just didn't seem right that you lived your entire life and you died, and if you had a hard life, there must be some balance. How can a loving God cause a person to suffer their entire life, and that's it? That doesn't seem fair at all. The Sadducees, though, didn't believe that. The Sadducees believed the first 5 books of the Bible were what you looked at. The rest of it would be commentaries on those first 5 books. That's what you grounded your belief in. And if you look at the first 5 books of the Bible, there's no mention of life after death. And so the most ancient Jews and the Sadducees later didn't believe that there was any kind of tangible life after death. Now, the Pharisees believed it was grounded in resurrection for a lot of reasons, but how they view the physical and the spiritual. But the Sadducees said there was no life after death. The only life we experienced after death was the memory of the people that would live later. Our lives would be continued in the memory of those. But there was no real tangible idea of life. And that's why the Sadducees asked Jesus that question. Woman was married to 5 men, in order, when the resurrection occurs, who's going to be her husband? I mean, that was one of those trick questions that Sadducees would ask to make it look, the resurrection life, it look stupid. That's the point, is to make it look dumb. But they didn't believe that. Now, by the time we get here, the idea that there's life after death is developed, and we see it a lot in the prophets. We see it here that there's life. But the Jews viewed, and I've said this before, and this is just what the Jews believed in the Old Testament and into the New Testament, that soul, that spirit, the spirit was that energizing force. I am alive because the Spirit enables me to live. The Spirit enables me. God, the breath of God, the ruach of God, enabled that lump of clay to live. That's what enables me to live. So I have God's energizing Spirit. It's not Holy Spirit, but it's an energizing Spirit from God. And that enables me to live. Now that's what the Jews believe. That's why breath is so important to Jews. Life doesn't start until you breathe. It doesn't start before. It starts when you breathe. When I die, that spirit leaves me, but that's not a soul. It's that energizing force leaves me and returns to God. It doesn't have any identity. It's just like a battery. It's, you put a battery in, it functions, when the thing toy gets broken, you take the battery out, and it doesn't function anymore. That's the way they viewed the Spirit of God. Now, therefore, and the soul and the body were tied together. You couldn't have independent souls and separated from bodies. That the two had to be together to have any kind of independent existence. So it wasn't like when you died, your soul went somewhere, your body went somewhere, and your soul went somewhere else. They didn't really believe that. To have an existence, you had to have both. And what they believed, and again, they're conveying this through story, not through science, but that when you died then, and Paul even writes about it, it's like falling asleep. You fell asleep, and you awaited the resurrection when you would be raised body and soul. And then you could have an existence in an afterlife. Not a soul independent of body, but you'd have both. That's why the resurrection of Jesus is so incredibly important for Paul. He calls it the first fruits of those who are going to rise. Because it shows that something is beginning, this resurrection of the dead. Therefore, we really are living at the end of time, when human beings are going to live in this new existence through the resurrection. That's what the Jews believed. Now, I'd say all of that because that's what's happening here. The Jews perceived that people would be sleeping in a place called Sheol. Sheol is not hell. Gehenna was the image of hell, and Gehenna was a garbage dump outside of Jerusalem where they burned trash. That was the image of hell, was Gehenna. Sheol was not hell. Sheol was a place of shadows, where those who had died slept until the resurrection. Boom. They weren't on clouds. They weren't playing harps. They weren't looking down on grandchildren. That's not what they were doing. They were sleeping, awaiting the resurrection. Boom. And at the resurrection, then they would live again. That's what the Jews believed. And that's what's happening here. What the median had done is what? To Samuel. They woke him up. That's why his response is, why did you disturb me? It's not that he was, playing backgammon, with Moses up in heaven. He was asleep. And why did you wake me up? Because this isn't the resurrection of the dead. This isn't the time where I would have another new existence. Okay. And what does Saul say? So when Samuel says that, how does Saul respond?
I'm in great distress.
I'm really in trouble. And he tells his trouble, right? And what is his principal problem? The Philistines are against me, and
God has turned away
from me. And I don't know what to do. When you hear that, how do you feel? I know how I feel. How do you feel when you hear that? Samuel saying or Saul saying to, this apparition of Samuel, I'm about to fight a battle. God has abandoned me. I don't know what to do.
It's all,
Yeah, scary. He's really sad. This is a sad figure. This isn't a bold military leader. He's really kind of a pathetic figure here. And what does Samuel say to him? Words that I'm sure Saul is anxious to hear.
why you ask me? Why ask me?
Yeah.
What do you want me to do about it?
Yeah. If God has turned against you,
What can I do?
yeah, I can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, remember what I said? What has happened? What is going to happen? What has already happened, in fact? What has already happened to Saul? What has God already done to Saul?
Took away,
Took away the kingdom. And why did God do it?
because Saul sacrificed. He wasn't supposed to.
Amalek. That time with the Amaleks.
Oh.
When you were supposed to kill everything
Yeah.
and you didn't do it. And at that point,
You were done.
you were done. You were done. So what's going to happen to the army?
Defeated.
The army is going to be defeated. And not only is the army going to be defeated, what else is going to happen as a result of the battle?
So,
They'll take over Israel.
Yeah,
whole
Israel's going to fall. Going to fall into the hands of the Philistines. And how does Saul respond?
He fell face down.
face first on the ground.
Falls on the ground, and what else?
Praise.
So he falls on the down. He's praying. What leaves him?
His strength.
His strength leaves him. Saul is right now. How would you describe Saul right here at this
A
point?
very defeated man.
He is a broken man. He is a broken man. And in fact, how do we see that Saul is a broken man?
Because he doesn't eat.
He doesn't eat. He stops eating. And in fact, and this again, this is a pathetic, a sad, broken person. Who approaches him?
The medium.
The medium, the woman from Endor. And she says to him what?
How many?
You gotta have something. You gotta eat something. And I got a little bit of bread. You gotta eat something. And what does Saul say back to her? Yeah, I'm not going to eat. And what happens at the end?
He eats.
He ends up eating, but not because he really wants to.
All his men are
Came
eating.
back.
Yeah. Okay. And then he goes away. Of course, he goes away into the night. A broken man back to his camp. So what do we know is going to happen to Saul? This battle with the Philistines. What's going to happen to Saul? He's done. It's over. But we still have a problem, right? And what is the problem that still has to be resolved? David's still a problem. Because David is now the bodyguard from Achish, the king of Gath, of the Philistines. Which means David's going to be in a position where he's going to have to, he and his men are going to have to kill themselves some Israelites, right? Okay. In chapter 29, we got right at the beginning, we're reminded what's about to occur. We got battle. And what's happening within the Philistine camp?
They don't want David.
The lords of the Philistines do not want David. Why do they not? Or they seem to be really skeptical. Why do they not want David?
Because David had killed so many of them already.
Well, remember that song they used to sing?
Thousands,
Who was he talking about when he said 10,000?
The Philistines.
Us, us, people that look like us. What is their real concern?
That he would start fighting.
That he's going to turn on them. And good gracious, he and his men are now what? The bodyguards of the king.
Yep.
David could turn on the king. He is in the best position to turn on the king. His job is to protect the king. He is right there beside him. Now, who breaks the news? And what do? Who do they go to with their concerns? They go to the king, right? And the king defends David, right? David's hasn't done anything to justify it. He's loyal, which again is kind of irony because we know David's been lying to the king. I don't find any fault with him. He's done fine with me. But what do they convince the king to do?
To send him back.
You got to send him. You got to send him back. Not telling you to kill him. Just send him home. We don't need his 600 men anyway. And so who breaks the news to David that he won't be engaged in this battle?
Kish.
Okay, the king goes to David. And what does the king say?
He says, wasn't my idea.
Wasn't my idea. I found nothing wrong with you. Which again, we the reader are thinking, geez, well, you should have. But the other guys don't trust you. And what does he tell David to go?
Back to the land of the Philistines.
You got to go back. You go back because they don't want you here. And how does David respond?
He doesn't understand, and he asked them, what has he found against them?
That's right. And how does Achish, and why aren't you going to let me fight? I want to fight for you. What does Achish say?
He says he knows knows that you have been as pleasing in my eyes as an angel of God.
Okay. But, what's the but?
Nevertheless,
The commanders have said.
The commanders say that they don't want you here, and therefore
you can't go.
you gotta go. You gotta go. And what does David do?
He goes.
Yep.
He
Early
goes.
in the morning.
He leaves early in the morning, so he goes back to Ziklag. And so now what have we resolved?
David.
We've resolved David's problem. David is not going to be in a position where he's going to kill Saul or any Israelite. He is not going to be lifting his sword up against his own people. So that's been taken care of. Although he's not mentioned, we the reader, as we look at this story, know that this has to occur, right? For David to be king, he cannot be king if he's killing his own people, right?
Yes.
Not only killing his own, but killing his own people for the enemy. He can't be king. He's not going to be king. Who is driving this story? Who is lurking behind the scenes?
The Lord.
The Lord is behind the story. The Lord is behind the story. So here we have at the end of this chapter, as we get ready to approach chapter 30, we've got the main characters, right, involved. We've got Saul and what is Saul's situation as we approach chapter 30.
He's had it.
He has had it. He has had it. He is an absolutely broken man. He is a broken man. Interesting. One of the things that Samuel says about the battle, that not only will Saul be there, and the Israelites are going to lose, who else is there?
Philistines?
The Philistines are certainly there. Who else? When they fight the next day,
The Lord.
The Lord, look at verse 19 of 28.
The Lord will deliver both Israel and you into the hands of the
Okay, and?
Tomorrow you and your sons will be with me.
So Saul isn't alone. Saul's sons are also there, which means what?
Dead.
They're gonna be killed. They're all gonna be killed.
Including
Jonathan.
Because Jonathan's a son of Saul, right? So Jonathan is going to be there too. Now remember, we thought we had Jonathan because one of the deals David made with Saul when he was in the cave was that make sure, because Saul recognizes that, David doesn't make sure, that Saul recognizes he's going to lose his kingdom. And remember, he makes David pledge, don't kill my family. I'm going to fall to you, but please don't. And David says, I won't. Well, David isn't going to need to do that. Because David isn't there. And Saul and his sons are going into a battle that they will lose. And they know that going in. Okay, and not only do they know that going in, who else knows that going in? We do. We know going in they're going to lose. And we know going in that this is it for Saul. This is it for that broken man. Okay, any questions? Really well-crafted story. Really, this is really good. Okay, next week we're going to finish out 1 Samuel. And like I said, we already know what's going to happen. We don't know how, but we know what's going to happen. Okay. All gone. Good. That's good. Let's have a word of prayer. Lord God, thank you so much for giving us this time together. And remind us that you not only are you in control, but that you're guiding your history. You're guiding your people to completion. So help us as we look at these characters and kind of identify with them, or at least understand them a little better. Help us to use that understanding to better understand ourselves and the people around us. Help us to do that. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.